We live on a beautiful planet. Today, our natural landscapes also boast man-made wonders, icons of engineering and architecture. So what are the world's modern wonders? We've compiled our top 7, from the tallest building on Earth to the longest underwater tunnel, from aviation's greatest airliner to engineering's greatest work of art. These are our modern wonders. The great engineering achievements of the modern world are more than purely functional. The visionaries who dreamed up their imposing shapes fused art and science to create structures of dramatic beauty. Our bridges, dams, and skyscrapers dominate our landscapes, as the pyramids dominated those of ancient Egypt. They are testaments to the creative genius of humankind. In the next 2 hours, we tunnel under, climb up, jump off, and fly with the greatest marvels the modern world has to offer. Brooklyn Bridge is a modern masterpiece from a bygone age. A symbol of humanity's ability to conquer nature, it was the moonshot of its day. When it was built, it was over twice as long as any suspension bridge on Earth. Its towers once soared above the Manhattan skyline. It was the first landmark of the vertical city. Yet a mysterious disease struck its workforce during construction and paralyzed its chief engineer. The Brooklyn Bridge spans New York's East River, connecting Manhattan and Brooklyn. The Brooklyn Bridge is an immense and complex structure. When it was completed in 1883, it was an engineering work of unparalleled genius. Though built in the age of the horse and cart, it's so strong that it now carries up to 150,000 cars a day. Keeping this old workhorse in top condition is the job of the East River Ironworkers.
I love working on the Brooklyn Bridge because it is the most famous bridge in the world. You see it in movies, you see it in commercials, it's everywhere. Once you come up here, it becomes part of you. It's like every time you see it, it's like, that's my bridge.
My favorite bridge is the Brooklyn Bridge because it's a work of art. There's no other bridge like this in the world.
It costs $3 million a year to keep the bridge operational. Today, the task is to reseal the joints on the cables.
There's no way I could ever sit behind a desk, drive a bus, or cab. This is the best job in the world. You have total freedom here. You're out in the open. It's beautiful.
I feel a special kinship for this bridge because my great-grandfather had worked on it as an ironworker when it was being built. I'm a 4th-generation ironworker now.
When construction began 4 generations ago in 1870, many thought the bridge would never be completed. Over 1.25 miles long in total, the main span measures 1,600 feet. The Gothic towers stand 272 feet above the river. They hold the main cables, which in turn support the roadway. Just one of these cables contains more than 3,500 miles of wire, enough to stretch from New York to London, England. The roadway hangs from the main cables via hundreds of vertical suspenders and diagonal stays, which together create a web of wire. The bridge was designed to be robust enough to cope not just with the traffic of the time, but the traffic of the future. Cables, suspenders, and stays must be routinely checked and lubricated, and as long as they are, ironworkers like Dave Collins have no doubt the bridge has a long life ahead of it.
I have no doubt that this bridge would probably make 500 years. I guess it's carrying about 20 times what it was designed for. So basically what we're going to do today is just inspect the clamps, look for loose ones, and for some erosion of some nature. Yeah, these look pretty good. These are not bad at all. They're pretty tight. It doesn't look like there's any erosion. I'm very comfortable here. Basically, it's like a second nature built into me where I'm comfortable climbing around. That'll be it for today, I guess.
Today, 10 bridges cross the East River. But Manhattan and Brooklyn used to be separate cities, divided by the water. Barbara Milstein is a historian of the Brooklyn Bridge at Brooklyn Museum of Art.
There was no way to get off the island, except literally by boat or swim across, which people did do occasionally.
Until the brilliant John Roebling burst onto the scene with plans for a suspension bridge twice as long as any other in the world. Tragically, in 1869, he was killed while surveying the proposed site. His son, Washington, took over the project. The key elements of the bridge are its Gothic towers, which stand on the bed of the river. Each tower was built on top of a giant watertight box called a caisson. Made out of wood, Brooklyn caisson weighed 3,000 tons and was the size of half a city block. The first courses of stone for the towers were laid on top of the caissons, gradually depressing them to the riverbed. As Washington Roebling's drawings show, compressed air was pumped into the caissons. Men entered via an airlock and dug the riverbed by hand. As the digging went on below, the towers were simultaneously constructed above, forcing the caissons ever deeper.
The men who went down into this caisson under the river, they really didn't know what they were getting into. They were certainly not men who had done this work before. And you can imagine what the sounds were like. It was alternately hideously hot and freezing cold. The smell was unbearable. The work was hideously hard to do.
Several men died from a mysterious illness known as Caisson's disease. In fact, they were victims of what scuba divers now know to be the bends. The trips in and out of the pressurized caissons caused nitrogen bubbles to form in their veins, damaging their nervous systems. Washington Roebling himself was disabled by the bends, and he had to direct operations from his bedroom overlooking the construction site. It took over a year to complete the foundations. The men left the caissons for the last time, and they were filled with concrete. It took almost 14 years to complete the bridge, nearly 3 times longer than scheduled. It also cost 27 men their lives. It's difficult today to imagine the excitement generated by the opening of the Brooklyn Bridge in 1883. For the first time, people and commerce could move quickly and easily between Manhattan and Brooklyn. The two separate cities began to merge into one Big Apple.
After the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, New York began to grow by leaps and bounds, by super speed. It was incredible, the development of the city. And thus, New York became one of the great cities of the world.
Taxi driver Peter Franklin is known as the Gabby Cabbie. He's an honors graduate from the streets of New York.
There is no question that the Brooklyn Bridge is the single most representative item of the city of New York. Because in a way, the Statue of Liberty, yeah, that's the whole country. The Empire State Building, yeah, that's the whole state. But Brooklyn Bridge really is New York.
Brooklyn Bridge not only links Manhattan with Brooklyn, it also spans separate epochs in American history.
When they started it, it was the Old West, cowboys and Indians, wagon trains and all that. By the time they finished the bridge, we were now hurtling towards America being the principal power in the world. So in a way, it was the transitional thing, almost like a time machine. It took us from the past and brought us into the modern world. When the Brooklyn Bridge was first completed, there were a lot of people who were afraid to walk across it. They were afraid to walk across it because they had never seen anything of this magnitude, and they thought to themselves, gee, is this thing going to stay up or not?
Despite the fears, over 150,000 people turned up to walk across the bridge on the day it opened.
As a matter of fact, on the first day, I understand they charged 1 cent for people to walk across. On the second day, realizing they had a good thing going, they charged 3 cents. And if that doesn't sum up businessmen of New York, I don't know what does.
The pedestrian boardwalk is the heart and soul of the bridge, a place to exercise, socialize, and enjoy the view. It's as much a park as a bridge. And it even has its own police patrols, just in case.
The bridge, I think it brings a lot to the city because both Brooklynites and Manhattanites utilize the bridge on a daily basis, along with tourists from the United States and from all over the world.
This is the 84th Precinct's favorite beat.
We like to talk to people, we like talking to tourists. It's a lot of fun just to be involved with the whole bridge during, day-to-day activities.
The bridge generates a sense of well-being.
It's just a beautiful spot. It's one of the best spots in the city to be at.
Never a bad view from up here. It's always beautiful.
Once upon a time, the Brooklyn Bridge was notorious as a suicide spot. Today, the bridge is one of New York's most romantic places. As a matter of fact, many newlyweds have their wedding photos taken here. John Roebling never lived to see the bridge he designed. But his vision ensured that it has flourished for well over 100 years. Brooklyn Bridge remains one of the main arteries of New York, the world's greatest city. That it still thrives in the 21st century is the ultimate accolade to those who designed it and built it. Coming up, hair-raising stunts atop the world's tallest building. Ever since human beings began to build, they have tried to reach the heavens. The Petronas Towers in Malaysia are so high, they almost seem to make it. This is the tallest structure mankind has ever built. 88 stories of steel, glass, and concrete tower 1,500 feet above street level. And this is what it feels like to jump off it. The Petronas Towers are located in the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur. The Petronas Towers are the headquarters of Malaysia's national oil company. Each tower can house 5,000 employees. The towers are cloaked in 170,000 square yards of stainless steel and tinted glass. When the sun shines, they sparkle like tropical diamonds. They fill with light like cathedrals of old. There is a 6-story shopping center and even an opera house. A sky bridge creates a passage between the towers at mid-height. The result is a building that is as unique to Kuala Lumpur as the Eiffel Tower is to Paris. Keeping this Asian jewel shining is an endless task for a small army of cleaners, from the very bottom all the way to the top. The Petronas Towers have 32,000 windows, and each one is cleaned by hand. Window cleaner Mohammed Jamil discovered on his first day that this job requires a strong head for heights.
First time I scared, really I scared, because this one is the first experience for me, and this work I never do before.
Even the wet sponges must be tied on. From this height, one would hit the sidewalk with the force of a falling brick.
For us now, this work is very easy for us. I never talking about the new guy. I don't know about that. So approximately we finish one tower within 4 months or 5 months.
Just in time to start all over again. This is one window cleaning job that's never done. Beyond a certain point, the higher a building is, the less cost-effective it becomes. As the Petronas Towers structural engineer points out, building the world's tallest involves ego as well as economics.
There is a certain element of status symbol in it. When you do a purely rational economic study, you find that the sort of ideal point at which it doesn't make sense to build much higher is in the range of perhaps 50, 60, maybe 70 stories. So if you're going above that, you're kind of making a conscious decision to do something more. The statement that the Petronas Towers are making is that Malaysia has arrived.
In the 20th century, America was the home of the skyscraper. But in the 1990s, the race for the sky shifted eastwards to the fast-growing economies of Asia. The Petronas Towers would proclaim that America no longer went unchallenged. Arlita Arif has been a key figure in the project since day one.
When we started, we didn't know we were going to build a very tall building, and certainly not the tallest building in the world. Our intention was basically to build a beautiful building, one that would put Malaysia really in the world map, and one that symbolizes what we think we are able to achieve.
But the winning design featured towers that would be just 50 tantalizing feet shorter than the Sears Tower in Chicago, the world's tallest building at the time. According to Arif, critical changes in height were then made for purely aesthetic reasons.
The buildings had a shorter pinnacle when it was first designed. It was suggested that perhaps by increasing the length of the pinnacle, the building would look more in proportion. And we tested out a few options. And the one that was selected just touched the tip at 442 meters, which just made it slightly taller than the Sears Tower in Chicago. So it was a pleasant surprise.
Surprise or not, the new pinnacles would beat the Sears Tower by 33 feet and make the Petronas Towers the world's tallest building. The taller a building, the bigger the problem of wind sway. The Petronas Towers can sway by up to 2 feet in high winds. This wouldn't be a problem, except for the Sky Bridge. Structural engineers realized that if the bridge was fixed rigidly into position, a tropical storm could bring it crashing down.
The method of supporting the Sky Bridge was a pretty critical question. We realized that if a gust of wind were to hit one tower first, half of that wind force would have tried to travel through the bridge and could have crushed it.
To get around the problem, they designed a bridge that floats in and out of the moving towers on gigantic bearings. An arch support completes the system.
The arch means that the midpoint of the bridge is equidistant between the two towers. The towers can do their dancing during the wind, and when they've done their dancing and they've stopped, the bridge will be equidistant between the towers again.
High above the Sky Bridge on the 88th floor, these men are in training. They are joining the elite group who clean the pinnacle of the building. It's spires. These students are used to working from a window cleaning gondola, but that's child's play compared to where they're going. To clean the spires, they must become experts in rappel, also known as abseiling. They think they've got a strong head for heights. They're about to find out.
We train them from the ball ring downwards first. That is to give them the experience, not to do the cleaning, but just to get them acclimatized to the situation, to have the feeling of what it is like to go out of the tower. Train them in a few phases. The first phase is basic abseiling, and then knowing the rope works. And then we also train these boys to do changing from one rope to another whilst in air. We prepare these boys mentally and spiritually to battle on top of the spire.
A student must undergo intensive training before his skill and nerve are ready for the spire. The Petronas Towers are like a vertical city, and getting thousands of inhabitants up and down the 88 floors safely and quickly was another challenge.
The design of elevators on a high-rise building or a skyscraper is a real challenge because you have a lot of people moving, tens of thousands of people moving up and down. They all want to get to work around the same time, go to lunch the same time, leave the same time. So you can end up with a huge backup. People have a limited tolerance for waiting. 30, 40, 50 seconds begins to seem like a very long time.
Office worker Raz Azaya Mohsin waits in the lobby for the first elevator of her journey to the 83rd floor. Top executives, however, don't have to wait at all. They have the option of leasing an elevator for personal use.
I'm almost there. Can you bring the lift down to the lobby, please?
As he enters the building, his private elevator is already waiting to take him to the 86th floor. Raz's is only just arriving. On the left, Raz's elevator ascends at 19 feet per second. On the right, the executive climbs much faster, so fast that he must equalize the pressure in his ears. Raz's ride only goes as far as the sky lobby, halfway up the towers. While the executive continues on his way, she must take an escalator up one floor to catch her next ride, a local cab that will take her on to the top half of the tower. Meanwhile, the executive's private elevator has whisked him non-stop to the 86th floor. He's already at his desk working, while Raz is still on the move. By the time she reaches her destination, deals may have already been cut 3 floors above. Nonetheless, the elevator system has got her 1,180 feet up in less than 2 minutes. Up next, a death-defying climb to the top of the spires. These men are preparing to climb the spire of the world's tallest building, Malaysia's Petronas Towers.
It's scary, but I don't have time to think. I just concentrate to my work. Hopefully, everything is go okay and clear.
Ismail is wearing a video camera strapped to his helmet to chronicle the climb. If he makes it, no camera will have been higher on any structure on Earth.
I must prepare properly the rope on the right position.
Ishmael climbs the spire first to fix the rappel ropes. If he makes a mistake, his student will fall. It's 150 feet to the top and 1,350 to the streets below. The wind can gust at up to 70 miles per hour at this height. The spire can sway by several feet. Ishmael reaches the summit. His helmet camera gives an idea of the dizzying height. With the rope fixed, the trainee begins his ascent. Ishmael helps him to transfer to the rappel rope. This job is so dangerous that the spires are cleaned only once a year. On December 31st, 2000, the Petronas Towers became the platform for the greatest official base jump of all time. "15 daredevils from around the world leapt into a new millennium and straight into the record books." In the age of the skyscraper, no building holds the title of world's tallest for long. One day, the Petronas Towers will be surpassed, just like the Sears Tower in the Empire State before them. But for now, they remain king of the skies. Concorde is the greatest civilian aircraft ever built. In the Aviation Hall of Fame, Concorde stands second only to the Wright brothers' maiden flight. Even before she leaves the ground, she goes like a bat out of hell. She cruises at twice the speed of sound, faster than the Earth rotates. Take off from London in the evening, and you can watch the sun rise in the west. Concorde has been flying for over 30 years, but she's so far ahead of the pack, she's out of sight. Concorde is an Anglo-French invention. She was conceived, developed, and perfected in Toulouse, France, and Filton, England. Tuesday, June 4th, 2002. 50 years ago today, Elizabeth II was crowned Queen of England. The crowning moment of this golden jubilee will be provided by another queen, Concorde, sovereign of the skies. At London's Heathrow Airport, Captain Mike Bannister is going through his pre-flight checks. Mike is the senior Concorde pilot in British Airways. There are 12 pilots in the team, but as number one, he's first choice to fly today's mission.
I'm very honored to be involved in the Jubilee flypast later on today. It's a great thrill. We've been preparing for it for over 4 months, and very soon we'll be setting off to join up with the world's leading aerobatic team, the Red Arrows.
At the time of the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977, Concorde had already been in service for 1 year. Remarkably, a quarter of a century later, she is still the world's only supersonic airliner.
We'll join up with the Red Arrows over the North Sea, then with the rest of the formation, route in over London towards Her Majesty. It's going to be a great moment. Concorde is a fantastic airplane to fly. She handles so beautifully. She's so responsive that she's the perfect airplane to fly in formation. I'm seeing all of the Mall and the whole of the front of Buckingham Palace. Truly millions of people there waving.
When she made her maiden test flight from Toulouse, France in March 1969, Concorde was decades ahead of her time. The transistor radio was still considered a neat new idea. Home computers and even digital watches were still a dream. Yet here was an aircraft which aimed to carry 100 passengers at twice the speed of sound. Concorde first smashed through the sound barrier in a test flight on the 1st of October, 1969. As she punched through the air at Mach 1, the sonic boom could be heard 20 miles away. It had cost over $3 billion to get Concorde airborne and supersonic. The 4 engines each provide 38,000 pounds of thrust, the equivalent of 6,000 family cars. Concorde is the only civilian aircraft that has afterburners. When lit, they give 20% extra thrust. The air intakes slow the speed at which the air hits the engines from 1,500 miles per hour to just 500 within their 11-foot length. The Gothic wing is sculpted from aluminum. There are no joints or welds. The Delta wing allows Concorde to take off and land at low speed, yet still fly supersonic. The trademark nose can drop by 12.5 degrees. Concorde has a high angle of attack on takeoff and landing. If the nose were fixed, the pilots would not be able to see the runway beyond. After the break, land before you leave on Concorde, the supersonic time machine. On the 25th of July, 2000, Concorde crashed just after takeoff from Paris Airport. Both French and British Concorde fleets were grounded. The disaster marred a previously unmatched safety record. A tire had punctured on takeoff, sending shrapnel into the fuel tanks encased in the wings. Amongst other measures, Kevlar linings were fitted to the fuel tanks to prevent recurrence, and within 15 months, the revamped Concorde was back in business. Concorde now flies 3 times a day from London and Paris to New York. She makes the 3,400-mile flight in less than half the time of a jumbo jet. She does it thanks to a series of engineering miracles. The pilot lights the afterburners for takeoff. The nose is raised and the afterburners are switched off. Concorde won't go supersonic until she reaches the Atlantic, 150 miles to the west.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, cruising along now, 26,000 feet at just under the speed of sound. We're estimating arrival in New York just over 3 hours from now, touching down around 10 minutes past 9.
Over the Atlantic, the pilot can really open her up. The afterburners are relit, and Concorde slips effortlessly through the sound barrier.
You would just go gently through the speed of sound, and you'd know you're through the speed of sound, because as the shock waves start to form, all the pressure instruments give a slight kick, and you know you are truly supersonic.
This plane is built for speed, and the faster she goes, the better she performs. At Mach 1.7, the afterburners are switched off again, and she accelerates to twice the speed of sound unaided. She's almost 60,000 feet above the Earth, on the edges of space, and flying as fast as a speeding bullet. Having beaten the sound barrier, Concorde must now beat the thermal barrier. At Mach 2, air friction heats her skin to 260 degrees Fahrenheit, well above the boiling point of water. Concorde's engines power the air conditioning system. Without it, the passengers would cook. As the plane heats up, she actually lengthens by up to a foot.
Fortunately, the designers thought of that, and throughout the airplane there are areas where the aircraft stretches. Only one of those is noticeable, and that's on the flight deck. There's a section between the flight engineer's panel and the piece behind where you can't get a sheet of paper on the ground, but in the air it opens up and you can get your whole hand in there. There's an apocryphal story about one of the early pilots putting his hat in that gap in supersonic flight. When he came down and landed, he couldn't get it out.
At this speed and height, jet fighter pilots must wear pressure suits and oxygen masks. Yet Concorde's passengers and crew need no special apparatus. It is the ordinariness of the ride that makes her so special.
If you think about it, you're flying at twice the speed of sound on the edges of space, and the passengers are sitting there in total comfort in their shirt sleeves, drinking champagne and eating caviar in a completely normal environment, and that is one fantastic achievement.
In 1996, Concorde made the transatlantic flight in record time, 2 hours, 52 minutes, and 59 seconds. That's an average ground speed of over 1,200 miles an hour for the entire flight. New York is 5 hours behind London time, and as the flight takes less than 3.5 hours, Concorde lands before it leaves. Concorde is a time machine.
She's a great airplane to fly from a pilot's perspective and a fantastic airplane from a customer's point of view. Nothing else offers you the opportunity to buy back time, to travel faster than the Earth rotates, to literally arrive before you leave.
30 miles out from New York, the the pilot lowers the nose cone ready for landing.
When one looks at Concorde from a distance, it seems to be much more pitched up than 11 degrees, but that's all it is. And then, of course, you touch down gently on the runway, reverse thrust, another roar from the engines, and you come to a stop.
Concorde may be over 30, but she's still turning heads.
Concorde is a piece of 20th century sculpture. It's a fusion of art and technology. And it looks so beautiful, it looks so right. It just captures people's imaginations.
She is likely to be over 50 years old before another supersonic airliner comes along. Perhaps it's a case of being unable to improve on perfection. Coming up, we brave the heights of the Eiffel Tower with its daredevil workforce. The Eiffel Tower is Europe's most recognizable landmark. This metal obelisk is a shrine to the engineering brilliance of the 19th century. It attracts more paying customers than any other monument on the planet. When built, it was twice as high as any structure on Earth. It remained the world's tallest building for 40 years. Incredibly, the tower was erected as a temporary structure and was nearly demolished almost a century ago. The Eiffel Tower is situated in the heart of the French capital, Paris. The Eiffel Tower has graced the Parisian skyline since 1889, the centennial of the French Revolution. That year also saw Paris host the World Fair, an international celebration of science and technology. The French government wanted an engineering masterpiece to honor the events, and it got one. The Eiffel Tower was a futuristic building, decades ahead of its time. These men are sky painters. Since its construction, the Eiffel Tower has been given a fresh coat of paint every 7 years. Now, the 18th painting campaign is underway. The crew is working just below the 3rd floor, almost 1,000 feet above the ground. The tower consists of 240,000 square yards of metal, and every inch must be covered. The crew will get through 60 tons of paint and use 1,500 overalls and brushes. the years, this Iron Lady has worn different colored coats. When she was first built, she wore Venice red. Altogether, she has been 6 different colors. Since 1968, she has been Eiffel Bronze. The tower was the brainchild of Gustav Eiffel, a visionary engineer who specialized in building iron railway bridges. His 5,000 blueprints for the tower's assembly were hand-drawn and incredibly detailed. Construction began in 1887. The tower would be made from over 18,000 metal parts, held together by 2.5 million rivets. It took just 100 ironworkers to assemble the tower. To the Parisians watching from the streets below, they were virtually invisible.
Seen from the ground, when you could see about 80 people spread on that surface at 50 meters, it looks like ants you don't see anymore. So people had the impression the whole thing was going up by itself.
The ingenuity of design and assembly meant the whole structure was completed in just 2 years, 2 months, and 5 days, and without a single fatality. The tower is shaped by aerodynamics. It is literally sculpted by the wind. Every curve, every strut was designed to minimize the amount of wind resistance. The spaces between the iron were as important as the iron itself. The metal structure weighs only 7,300 tons, yet it barely moves, even in the strongest winds. Place the tower in a cylinder, and the air inside it would weigh more than the tower itself. The physical beauty of this spider web in the sky saved it from an early demise. The Eiffel Tower was only meant to stand for 20 years, but it became a permanent feature on the Paris skyline. Next up, how Gustav Eiffel made a king's ransom. Gustav Eiffel stood to make a fortune from the newly built Eiffel Tower if he could entice enough paying customers. Few would be prepared to climb the 1,665 steps to the top, so he installed hydraulic elevators to carry them. In 1889, elevators were a new technology. The public flocked to the tower for one of the most thrilling rides on the planet. 2 million paid to make the ascent in 1889 alone. Gustav Eiffel wiped out his debt within 2 years of the tower opening.
To be in the center of Paris at 300 meters and to look down to the city would have been a spectacular thing. You could almost boast about it, that you'd done that, that it was a sort of personal achievement.
It remains a thrill more than a century later. Eiffel Tower still soars above the low-rise city, giving spectacular views. More than 6 million ascend the tower each year, and the figure is rising. All the more incredible, then, that the hydraulic elevators from the 19th century are still operating. They are maintained by a team of dedicated engineers.
These lifts are probably the last example of the 19th century technology. Still working, still used. and we do intend to keep them alive.
This cylinder weighs over 200 tons. As the cylinder drops, it pushes this piston. The piston pushes this trolley, which in turn pulls these cables, which lift and lower the elevator cabins. Today's system represents a fusion of old and new. Computers control the speed of the elevators and perform thousands of safety checks every second. And yet the pistons are still lubricated as they always were, with goose fat. How many Parisians does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is 2. But they must have a head for heights. This is the perfect lighting rig. Floodlights illuminate the tower from the inside to create the impression of liquid gold. Eiffel Tower was a pioneering work of genius. Wrap a skin around her iron frame, and you have the essence of the modern skyscraper. She has stood guard over Paris for more than 100 years. Yet she remains a modern icon, an anthem to the world of iron and technology. Next up, we pay homage to an American icon, Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam, an American pyramid. A concrete giant in an unforgiving desert.
Building a dam, it's a lot of hard work, I gotta tell you.
Many said it couldn't be done. Many died in its construction.
Hoover's not just any dam, it was the first of its kind, size, magnitude.
Its completion was a victory of human courage in the face of adversity. It tamed the mighty Colorado River, made the desert bloom, and changed the southwest of America forever.
It's just incredible to watch and work around the power of water.
Hoover Dam straddles the state line between Nevada and Arizona in the American Southwest. Hoover Dam is a vast concrete wall that holds back the Colorado River and forms Lake Mead. Only 45 feet thick at the top, at its base it's almost as thick as it is tall. It stands 726 feet high and contains almost 7 million tons of concrete. Pat Paternostro inspects the labyrinth of tunnels and conduits inside the dam wall.
It's quite a bit of concrete. They've said you could pave a highway from San Francisco to New York with the amount of concrete that's placed here.
In its day, Hoover was the biggest dam ever built. It remains the largest concrete dam in the Western Hemisphere. But it is more than just a wall. It's a work of art. Ordinary concrete surfaces are transformed by Art Deco designs. There are intake towers standing 400 feet above the lake bed. Italian craftsmen applied the finishing touches, which give the dam its outstanding beauty. Over 38 million visitors have come here to admire its grandeur. They soon learned that without Hoover Dam, the Southwest would be a very different place. Before Hoover Dam, Las Vegas was an unknown railroad stop in the middle of the desert. The dam brought water and electricity, fame and fortune to Nevada. Vegas has never looked back. In LA, too, the population relies on Hoover for much of its power and water. The dam generates 4 billion kilowatt hours of hydroelectricity every year. Hoover's power plant contains 15 130 megawatt generators. Just one could supply a city of 400,000 inhabitants with all their power needs. But hydroelectric power is just a commercially useful byproduct. Hoover Dam's real job was to control the Colorado River. The Colorado ran wild for countless eons as it carved the Grand Canyon in its race southwest to the Gulf of California. America's most dangerous river seemed untamable. Annual spring floods caused misery and ruin for farmers in Southern California. When the river dried to a trickle in the hot summers, crops withered and cattle died. Hoover Dam was conceived to control floods and store water for irrigation. Work began in 1931 during the Great Depression. For unemployed young men like Lee Tillman, news of the Hoover Dam project was electrifying.
I read in the newspaper and heard on the radio that they were going to build a big dam down on the Colorado River, and that the government was going to spend $165 million. That was a lot of money in those days, and it had a promise of an opportunity for a young man. I was 18 years old.
Along with thousands of others, Lee headed for Las Vegas. He was one of the lucky ones and quickly got a job as a truck driver.
I got $5 a day driving a truck down there. I could go into a grocery store and feed my family for a week on $5. So, you know, there's a big difference between, you might say, nothing and $5 a day.
The deadliest job belonged to the high scalers, men who swung from ropes 1,000 feet above the ground to blast and scrape the canyon walls in preparation for the dam's concrete. It was said that only the most desperate became high scalers. If you weren't starving, you didn't need this job badly enough. It was 2 years into the project before the first concrete could be poured. The dam wall was raised in interlocking blocks. A mountain of concrete was delivered in buckets, 8 cubic yards at a time. The concrete was poured 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. working conditions were extreme. 1931 was the hottest year on record. Temperatures soared above 140 degrees Fahrenheit.
None of us were used to this heat that came from someplace. So there's no place like the heat was here then.
The canyon was an oven. By August 1931, 14 men had already died of heat exhaustion. The conditions were so harsh that at first Lee barely registered the magnitude of the project.
After it began to come up a little ways, I remember thinking one time, my gosh, I'm a part of something that's just tremendous. And from then on, every time I'd come down, I'd see that dam seem like it'd grow a little bit every time I come down. And it was amazing. And then I really began to feel I was a part of something very important.
For 2 solid years, the concrete continued to pour. Then, on the 29th of May, 1935, the job was done. 2 years ahead of schedule and under budget, an army of the unemployed had written itself into the history books. It took over 6 years for Lake Mead to fill up behind Hoover's gigantic wall.
So about 200 feet from this wall here, you have the force of Lake Mead angling downward on us. It's about 45,000 pounds per square foot. So if it breaks today, we're going to Mexico.
Hoover Dam and Lake Mead transformed the Southwest almost overnight. They stopped the vicious cycle of flood and drought, replacing it with a constant flow of water. Southern California became America's salad bowl. Hoover Dam is no longer the largest dam in the world, but it is still the greatest. It's both a masterpiece of engineering and an architectural classic. 96 men died during its construction, not including those who perished from heat exhaustion. But the rest of the 5,000 overcame the heat, the danger, and the depression to produce a monument to the sheer will of humanity. Their achievement is second to none. After the break, take a ride along the Panama Canal and through its deadly Hell's Gorge. This is the world's greatest man-made waterway. As early as the 16th century, people dreamed of a canal which could link the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It took over 150,000 workers 20 years of toil to dig the 50-mile passage. On average, 600 workers died for each mile of canal hewn from the tropical jungle. Since it was completed in 1913, almost 1 million ships have passed through the Panama Canal. Before the canal, it took 6 weeks to sail from New York to San Francisco via the treacherous seas around Cape Horn. Now it can be done in just 3 weeks. The Panama Canal crosses the narrowest part of the Central American Isthmus. Panama has a mountainous interior, so the canal is not a simple trench between oceans. Rather, it is a lock and lake system that carries ships up and over the high ground. The Panama Canal is an ingenious water elevator. It lifts ships 85 feet from sea level via a series of locks and then lowers them back down again on the other side. The Eleonora is designed to squeeze through the locks and cuts of the canal. She's about the size of the Titanic. Tugboats buzz around her as she approaches the Miraflores Lock at the Pacific end of the canal. Steering a 27,000-ton ship into a narrow lock is like trying to park a juggernaut on a sheet of ice. By law, only specially trained pilots can take ships through the canal system.
Stop engine.
Stop engine.
Oscar Soto has been a Panama Canal pilot for 10 years.
Now passing 327, sir.
Captain, we go to the port wing, please.
Port wing?
Yes.
Midship! 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 Roger, midship, sir.
The Eleonora's captain must surrender his authority to Oscar while the ship is in the canal.
Panama Canal is the only place in the world, so far as I know, that the pilot takes full control of the navigation of the ship.
With millions of dollars as well as human lives resting on his shoulders, it's not a job for the faint-hearted.
420!
Thank you!
Oscar feels the shifting currents beneath his feet and watches for trouble like a hawk.
Midship! We can lose the engine, we can lose the rudder. There could be a failure in the locks. So we have to be ready for everything. Dead flow ahead!
A pilot must always think 2 steps ahead. The Eleonora only has inches of room on either side.
Dead flow ahead!
The gates shut and the water level rises until it equalizes with the chamber ahead. The gates open and the ship moves on. The Miraflores locks raise the Eleonora 54 feet above sea level.
3314.
She sails on towards the Culebra Cut, a 9-mile gorge carved from the rock of the Continental Divide. It was here that the first attempt to dig a canal in the 1870s failed. The workforce nicknamed the cut Hell's Gorge. French engineer Ferdinand de Lesseps had built the Suez Canal and thought he could do the same in Panama. But after 7 years of fighting malaria, yellow fever, and a brutal climate, the French had excavated only 1/10 of the canal. More than 20,000 workers lost their lives. De Lesseps abandoned the project, bankrupt and insane. 15 years later, the US government thought it could succeed where the French had failed. Steam shovels enabled the Americans to excavate more in a day than the French had managed in a month. Temperatures in the Culebra Cut rose to 120 degrees Fahrenheit at noon, and with blasting and landslides, this was the most hazardous area of construction.
It involved removing millions and millions of cubic yards of rock, solid rock. At one point, there were 13,000 people working there. It was 12-hour shifts, very intensive schedule, day after day, only Sundays off.
Almost 100 years later, blasting still goes on. Canal widening is part of the modernization program designed to increase the flow of traffic through the canal. 13,000 ships a year negotiate its locks and waterways at an average toll of $56,000 each. After passing through the Culebra Cut, ships sail on to Lake Gatun. The 164 square miles of Lake Gatun were created to provide the water needed to work the locks. The rainforest is responsible for Panama's high annual rainfall, which keeps the lake topped up. But the forest is under threat. 2/3 of it has been chopped down this century. If the destruction continues, the canal could be in danger within a decade. On average, 33 ships a day pass through the canal's 3 sets of locks. Each one uses 52 million gallons of water, a loss to Lake Gatun of 3 billion gallons every day, the equivalent of 3,000 Olympic swimming pools. When ships reach the end of Lake Gatun, they are lowered down to sea level through the Gatun locks. These locks are a giant machine of concrete, steel, and water. Once through the Gatun locks, it's plain sailing out into the Atlantic. The creation of a water passage across Panama was one of the great human achievements, the realization of a 400-year-old dream. These 50 miles between the oceans are among the hardest ever won by human hands. Up next, a battle through miles of rock beneath the sea to dig the Channel Tunnel. The English Channel, a stretch of sea that separates England and France. For centuries, people dreamed of digging a tunnel beneath it, but all who tried failed. In the 1980s, the French and English joined forces to try again. This time, they did it. 13,000 workers, 10 million tons of equipment, 93 miles of rock. This is the longest marine tunnel in the world. Many believe it's the world's greatest modern wonder. The Channel Tunnel passes beneath the sea between Folkestone, England, and Coquelles, France. Before the tunnel opened, there was only one way to get across the channel. The journey from London to Paris took an entire day. Now, with a Eurostar train, it takes just 3 hours. These are amongst the most sophisticated trains in the world. Their top speed is 186 miles per hour. Eurostar really flies. It gets you from the center of London to the center of Paris in less time than it takes by plane. If you travel on the shuttle, you can even drive from England to France without leaving dry land. But before the tunnel opened, this man crossed from England to France on foot. The last time this happened was during the Ice Age.
To be the first man to cross the channel by foot for 15 or 17,000 years, it was absolutely brilliant, and I'd do it tomorrow again.
On the day in question, he was 150 feet below the seabed, 13 miles from England. French territory was just a yard away. He was one of the army of tunnel tigers who were digging the Channel Tunnel. Graham's counterpart on the French side was Philippe Cosette. Both sides had been digging towards each other for a total of 24 back-breaking miles. Now they were separated by a yard of rock. At 11:13 a.m. on December the 1st, 1990, England ceased to be an island.
We reached through, we shook hands, we exchanged greetings, and we exchanged the flags. When we actually broke through, there was a wind howling through the hole, and it actually took my helmet off.
The first land link since the Ice Age was finally opened. Graham had the honor of being the first to cross into France.
Philip and myself do realise that we were involved in a moment of history, and we realise that it's only going to happen the once. Because even if you do another Channel Tunnel, they're not going to break the record. We've done it. We've made history.
It took the Tunnel Tigers 3 years to dig their way into French territory. By train, Graham's journey from coast to coast takes only 20 minutes. Strictly speaking, there is not one Channel Tunnel, but 3. 2 rail tunnels run either side of the smaller service tunnel, in which Graham and Philippe made their historic breakthrough. The tunnels were bored in 12 stages. Both the English and the French teams had to dig 3 tunnels underground, from the coast to the inland terminals, and 3 tunnels under the sea. This is not Cape Canaveral, but Folkestone, England. Not the stages of a space rocket, but sections of a tunnel boring machine, or TBM for short. 11 TBMs were used to dig the Channel Tunnel. The largest weighed over 600 tons and measured almost 30 feet across. The sharp end of a TBM is only the tip of the whole machine. The main body stretches back 800 feet and is manned by a crew of 80. The gigantic rotating jaws got to work on the 15th of December, 1987. Its tungsten carbide teeth and blades began to tear their way through the rock. The TBM is a self-sufficient tunneling machine that can dig up to 190 feet of tunnel a day and install concrete lining on the walls. Many of the workers were veteran tunnelers, but no one had experience of anything so vast and complex. There was a lot to learn.
When you start a project like the Channel Tunnel or any tunnel, the learning curve is very, very steep, and you try and climb that steep learning curve as quickly as possible to get onto an easy drive.
Up next, disaster strikes as the sea pours in. Soon after work on the Channel Tunnel began, the English team hit fractured rock. Work almost ground to a halt as the sea came pouring in.
It hit morale very early on. People weren't going as quickly as they wanted to go. And people thought, my God, how long is this going to carry on for? And will it kill the project?
For a while, it looked touch and go, but the English struggled through 3 miles of leaking rock and got back on track.
There were criticisms of the amounts of money that were paid to these men. Believe me, these men earned every penny.
Mile after mile, they drove their mechanical moles onwards. The high points came whenever one of the 12 sections of tunnel was completed. The climax came in the summer of 1991 when the rail tunnels finally met deep beneath the channel. They had fought their way through 10 million cubic yards of rock. They were 2 weeks ahead of schedule and right on target. The biggest undersea drive in history was over. Today, the tunnel contains high-speed rail lines which carry more than 300 trains a day. The shuttle locos are among the most powerful in the world. They carry cars and trucks, and their rolling stock are the largest on Earth. In 1996, the unthinkable happened. On the 18th of November, a shuttle carrying trucks from France to England caught fire. All 34 people on board escaped into the service tunnel. Service tunnel vehicles rushed firemen towards the scene and the injured away. The rail tunnel became a blast furnace, reaching almost 2,000 degrees. The train wheels fused to the track. The disaster cost Eurotunnel almost $500 million. But the safety systems worked. The service tunnel remained clear of smoke and no one perished. Today, the Channel Tunnel is the most heavily used railway system in the world. In the first 5 years of operation, trains carried 28 million passengers and 12 million tons of freight under the sea. Digging the Channel Tunnel was one of the greatest engineering challenges of the 20th century. Its success makes it a contender for the title of the greatest engineering achievement of all time. These 7 modern wonders each represent staggering victories of human beings over nature. They are celebrations of our creativity, monuments to our imagination.